Hi everyone, my name is Ava and I'm an American living in the Netherlands. Okay, I haven't filmed a video in a while, and I love how I chose to film a video right before I head to the hairdressers today. So, nothing if not keeping it real on this channel. That's how I roll. But surprise, surprise, my bad hair day is not what I'm here to talk to you about today, mostly because I've been having a bad hair day since 2008, and I decided that cutting my own bangs was a good idea. It's never a good idea. All the teenagers watching this who watch TikTok videos and try to cut your own bangs, just don't do it. Listen to your big sister. What I'm here to talk to you about today is the fact that, as many of you may know, I've had a child in the Netherlands recently. And becoming a parent here has really added a whole other perspective and insight, layer, choose your pick, on my experiences here in the Netherlands as an American. I want to talk to you about why I will not be raising, and I say I, but I'm doing this with my Dutch wife, why we will not be raising our daughter in the United States. Now, I'm American. I grew up in the US, in New York, and I loved it. I'm really happy about that. I really enjoyed my experiences there. So as someone who does have that experience, I am still planning on making different life choices for my daughter. Now, of course, we can't predict the next 20 years of our lives. We may end up making different choices along the way, but as of right now, we are not planning on moving to the US in the near future. And here are some reasons why. Now, this first thing is about your very fundamental basic ability to be able to be there for your kids. Now, in the US, it is no surprise that there's a lot of time spent devoted to your work. And I think the narrative there is more about being able to provide for your family. There is nothing wrong with that. That is a perfectly noble goal to work towards. But that said, in the Netherlands, that isn't quite as much the focus as being there for your family physically. So while both things are important in both places, I do think that in the US there is more weight given to providing for your family, and in the Netherlands there's more weight given to being there for your family. So as a parent in the Netherlands, people fully expect that you will drop anything and go be there for your kids if needed. They also kind of look down upon sending your kids to daycare like 5 days of the week. In the Netherlands, that is really uncommon. If you do that, then people do have something to say about it. Even if you send your kid to daycare 4 days, that's enough to raise an eyebrow for very many people. Now, I personally think that people should do what's best for them and in their situation, but I am amazed when I, for instance, watch these family vlogs of new parents with busy jobs in the US. I am just so impressed and in awe of how they keep afloat. Because in the Netherlands, first of all, you have a lot of leave, and second, you have a lot of flexibility from your work. So in the US, you could have a job where you're really lucky and you could get a significant chunk of parental leave in the beginning. That is great. But what I like about the Netherlands is that, first of all, we don't get a lot of leave here when your child is born. That is not how Dutch people work. Dutch people are very economically driven. That's still in their blood. And they also feel like people should choose to be away from work with their family. So I feel like there's still some long way to go in terms of like paid leave that is more standardized and mandated by the government. However, what is really common in the Netherlands that is not in the US is working part-time. So you could build your career, grow in your career while working part-time. And when people have young kids at home, especially when they're not in school yet, what they'll do is work like 4 days out of 5, and one of those days is parental leave, or maybe your job is already 4 days because that's becoming increasingly more common. And then you send your kid to 3 days or 2 if like grandparents can help out, or maybe you take even more time off and you work even more part-time. That's all pretty common here in the Netherlands. And of course it does have an impact on your career and what you earn, but it's less of an impact than it would have in the US. Like in the US, I can't imagine that you would be a manager who worked 4 days. Whereas I work at a place where the director is the director for 4 days and does something else 1 day a week. So that is also possible. In my own personal situation, I am using parental leave 1 day a week, and that's gonna last me quite some time. So a couple of years, and then my kid goes to school. And then the situation's a little bit different, but I feel so privileged and so lucky to be able to spend the years between, I don't know, age 1 and 3 or 4 with my kid, like a bit more time during that time period. I think when you have a kid, there's so much focus and emphasis on the first year of life, which I completely understand. It is so special, and there's a lot that you need to do. If you've given birth, you need to physically recover and just be human again. If you are the non-birth parent, you still somehow have to physically recover. Not the same, not even remotely the same, but definitely go back to your normal self. Like, there's time needed for that. It is a full-time, all-consuming job raising a kid, especially in that first year. It's just about survival. Like, whew, if they made a reality TV show out of that. Let's not get carried away. But there's so much emphasis on those early months that I think there isn't as much emphasis given to what happens next. So what happens after then? And working part-time here in the Netherlands is allowed me to spend 1 day a week where it's just me and my daughter. That's it. So my partner isn't there, she's at work, my kid is not going to daycare. I have a full day with her, which can be long at times. Oh my God. Especially when your kid likes to wake up at 5:30 a.m., which I will take. I am not complaining about that. You know, it has been worse. 5:30 a.m. is fine. But I noticed that as she got older, there was way more bonding happening. Now, of course, you need to bond in the beginning. But what I'm trying to say is that the bonding doesn't stop. So I feel like there need to be provisions in place so that you can spend time with your kid. Now, forget all of this, okay? For a second, let's say that this is just extra and you have your weekends and evenings and you prioritize that. What I'm wondering is, how do parents in the US do it, even in office jobs? So even if they're not at a job where they just need to be there all the time, I don't know, answering questions or working something like physical. So even if you don't have that type of job, I feel like office jobs are so much more inflexible than here in the Netherlands. Like, if you have to show up physically, like if you work remotely, it's all different and different story. But I feel like my job is so much more flexible. And I've seen this around me, that if my kid is sick, I can just drop everything and go tend to my kid. And they are sick so freaking often in the beginning. I knew this, but then like times 10. So I also wonder what happens when your kid is sick in the US and you can't go to them. Like, that seems really stressful. And I feel like you have way less flexibility in the US in that type of situation than in the Netherlands. So I just want to be there for my kid. And I feel like that is more possible here in the Netherlands than in the US, for various reasons. Number 2 has to do with parenting styles and also kind of the society around it, where these parenting styles stem from. I feel like it's maybe an interactive loop that feeds each other. So the parenting styles that inform how society collectively behaves, and maybe some societal norms also inform policy, and then that feeds into how we parent. So I do think that that's the case in both cultures. But you know what's totally different? How Dutch people parent compared to Americans. In the Netherlands, you'll find some of the happiest kids in the world, so Dutch parents obviously know what they're doing. But some of these normal Dutch parenting techniques would have Americans calling child protective services before you could say, give me a break. Whereas here in the Netherlands, it's barely gossip material. The parents aren't even there to be doing the gossiping because they're doing something else. So this brings me to the next point, where I feel like in the US, kids are way too protected. Don't get me wrong. I, as a parent, definitely want to protect my kid, and I just want to be there the whole time to make sure nothing bad happens. But that's just not possible. So here in the Netherlands, the approach I feel like is a little more sustainable, where it's like you teach the kids to make mistakes, to be adventurous, and then also manage the situation themselves. Honestly, I feel like in the US, kids weren't always this restricted. I feel like older generations as kids could just play in their garden, like climb a tree in their backyard, and, discover the world for themselves. Whereas I swear in the US these days, if they see a kid unattended in their garden, like a kid's own garden, their own house, the parents could be watching from inside, the neighbors or someone might actually call CPS, Child Protective Services, because apparently that's considered really unsafe. So for various reasons, things in the US have changed. And let me tell you, I feel like in the Netherlands, if that happened, Dutch people would consider that living in a dystopian society. And I think part of it, is now policy. So that's what's required by law. And the other part of it is just what parents really feel comfortable doing, because there are all these scary things that they see and they hear, and then they want to keep their kids close. Here in the Netherlands, I really appreciate that there's a lot more focus on, we're not going to just lock up our kids. No, we're going to make sure that society is safe for the kids. And there isn't a lot of blame on the parents when something happens to the kid, or, because stuff happens everywhere. Or if, let's say, a kid gets hurt playing in the playground, it isn't necessarily the parent's fault. It's more, it's the kid. The kid is learning. You're going to help the kid learn how to navigate the situation better next time. If they climb too high and fall down and they get a little bit injured. In the US, immediately, I feel like society jumps to bad parenting. Like that is just so extreme from my perspective. If you come to the Netherlands, you may notice one thing, that there are a lot of playgrounds around, which is great. The other thing you may notice is that the playgrounds are actually built for rough play and being adventurous and exploring. And I think in the US, the playgrounds are pretty standard and kind of, I feel like they used to be a bit more adventurous and encouraging rough play and maybe, climbing high. But right now, I feel like they've moved away from that to make it safe as possible. You don't want to have kids getting injured here because, I don't know, people could sue each other. I feel like if you're afraid of anything, it's probably that people are going to sue you in the US. And of course, I understand as a parent, you are very afraid of your kid getting hurt. Like, I know I don't even want anything happening to the hair on my daughter's head. If you don't believe me, ask my wife. She's been trying to get me to get our daughter a haircut for a really long time. She's like, we need to sign her up for a haircut. And I just refuse. Nothing's gonna happen to the hair on my daughter's head. So you see, I have these instincts as well. I am an American, I'm also just human and a parent, so of course I want to keep my kid close and safe. But I also think I'm not doing them any services by keeping them locked up or by keeping them under constant supervision, because at some point the bird has to leave the nest. And at some point they're going to have to do things on their own. And this brings me to my next point, independence. I feel like the way Dutch parents do parenting really encourages independence. And Dutch kids seem to be really independent, especially if you compare them with kids in the US, because in the US, like I know when I taught college, I still thought these 18-year-olds or 19, even 20-year-olds were not very independent. They were quite coddled. The university system made sure that they had, I don't know, access to food without them having to cook it. The dorms don't even come with kitchens often. And sometimes if they do, they're like these sad shared kitchens that don't allow for much. So independence isn't even encouraged there. Like when you're 18 plus years old. It's really funny. Dutch kids are taught independence from an early age. Like as babies, just like they do in Scandinavia, people will let them sleep outside independently. When baby is old enough, 6 months, baby goes and sleeps in their own room. Not every single kid, of course, has these experiences, but there are traces of this pretty prevalent in Dutch culture. So that shows you how early independence starts here. Here in the Netherlands, from a young age, you see kids just wandering around by themselves, where it has you wondering, like, how old are you? And are you sure you should be here by yourself? And at that point, even I get really vigilant when I see a kid just walking around like that without any adults nearby. But that's the thing. I do think Dutch people collectively make sure that the kids are able to exercise their independence. So here in the Netherlands, kids will go to playgrounds on their own. And I do think that if there are other adults just around in the vicinity, that they will pay attention and make sure that nothing happens to the kid. I think it's a joint societal responsibility, whereas in the US, it's very much the parents' responsibility. And I think in the Netherlands, it would be considered sad if the kids weren't given independence, whereas in the US, it's considered being a good parent and protecting them. Okay, so I know that this is a very broad blanket statement, pretty generalized. Of course, people in the US parent differently and people in the Netherlands parent differently. They're, of course, protective parents in the Netherlands as well. These are just my general observations. So of course, I'm curious to hear about your own personal experiences. This is just what I see right now from my perspective. Now, moving on to the next thing I wanted to talk about, and this really surprised me. So it comes as no surprise to people maybe that in the US, there is this high focus on getting your kid to be more involved in standard educational practices, like from an early age. Don't know why I had to say that in such a convoluted way. Clearly, the education focus was not very sharp when it came to me. But by that, I just mean that they are really more accustomed to school at a younger age, that they go into the more content-heavy topics at an early age, as opposed to focusing on play, which is the case in the Netherlands. I was really surprised at how this has gotten more extreme with time in the US. And I've seen that on social media. So I follow Emily Oster on Instagram. She's an economist turned popular book writer when it comes to child rearing and the facts about pregnancy, kids, and parenting. So I really enjoy following her because she will kind of lay down the facts for you from like, what do the data say? What do we know up to this point? And it's all data driven. So unlike what I'm doing here, which is observational driven, which is also interesting to hear, but I like following her for some of the facts, let's say. And I say facts because oftentimes you don't have enough data to know something, which is also valuable information. Well, she did a little piece where I was surprised to learn that preschool has gotten more intense and more academically focused. Preschool, you're talking 3-year-olds. So 3-year-olds now will know how to hold a pencil and write a little bit. So basically, because of that, they're already teaching kids, like, I don't know, arithmetic at the age of 4. And I think that's great, but it just feels so extreme. Like, I don't need my daughter to be Albert Einstein. I need my daughter to be happy and kind. Those are my goals as a parent. You can see that I've lived in the Netherlands for a few years now. So what do they do in the Netherlands? So of course they teach your kids stuff starting age 4. And even in daycare, my kid learns more educational stuff. And there's also something that's called like preschool prep that you can send your kids to so they get accustomed to what preschool is like. So I'm not saying that that's totally absent here from the Dutch landscape. It's just more that there is still a huge focus on play, going outside. It's really beautiful to see because I feel like they get to enjoy childhood a little bit, the kids here. In the US can be very much focused on getting as good as you can at this particular skill. Whereas here in the Netherlands, the focus is on enrichment, learning new things, finding things you enjoy and you like. So I much prefer this, and I would really much rather have this for my kid than unrealistic high expectations. Again, nothing wrong with wanting to be ambitious for your child and having goals for your child. I think that's very human. That's something I can definitely imagine that you have as a parent. I also have it, so I don't need to imagine that much. I also can relate to it. But at the same time, I think I just prefer the more relaxed Dutch approach, which also becomes relevant when you talk about going to college. In America, at some point, going to college was something that not everybody did. Now college education is more accessible to everyone. That is great. People who want to go to college should have access and should be able to go. I do believe in that. However, there is now this intense focus on getting into the best college, whatever that means. And for that reason, you have that extreme focus that we talked about in preschool or in elementary school, where kids are then training to go to a good college. And they're doing all of these things with that as their singular focus so that they can eventually get, I don't know, a really great job and or have that college education for the rest of their lives. And you know what? As someone, quite honestly, who has gone down that path, let me just tell you, I don't get the hype. I would much rather that my child has options and sees a variety of things that they could become when they grow up. Because do we ever really grow up? I start to question that these days because I definitely don't feel like a grown up, even though I am with a child of my very own. It is quite frightening. I think another reason for this split, I think, between the US and the Netherlands, where in the US, it seems to be more binary, like you go to college or you don't. And then there's a huge disjunct between the two, is because there's just one type of college for the most part. Not always, because you have community college, just 2 years, or you have like some technical universities where you do, I don't know, techie stuff. You do have some differences, but in the Netherlands, that's more streamlined. So you have like a university, more theoretical degree, you could have a more applied degree, or you could just be trained to do something useful. Like you could train to become a baker, you could train to be a plumber. So you actually have trainings that you could do to do something specific, and the options are quite vast. Whereas in the US, you don't have that kind of specialized focus, which I think makes it really difficult. And that extreme emphasis on going to university, I mean, this leads to so many sleepless nights for kids and just all the stress and pressure. And let me tell you, I really hope my daughter is done with her sleepless nights, because I am too. So no more sleepless nights for her. So those are some thoughts I wanted to share with you today. And as usual, I'm curious to hear about your own. So don't hesitate to share them in the comment section down below. And as usual, until next time.